and welcome to our first lecture in teaching listening. Today, we're going to talk about the nature of listening. And I'd like to start our course with this quote from David Noonan. He was asked at a conference, somebody said, what can you tell me about, what are your thoughts about listening? And he thought for a moment, and he told the person, listening is the gasoline in the engine of second language acquisition. So think about that for a moment. We'll come back to it in a few seconds. Listening is the gasoline of second language acquisition. Today's lesson, we're going to talk about the nature of listening in a second or foreign language. And we're also going to try and understand listening so that we can teach it better. Going back to that quote, there's a nice picture of an engine of shiny, a very shiny, looks like a very powerful engine. Listening is the gasoline in the engine of second language acquisition. So a car doesn't run without fuel, right? And language, we cannot learn a language without listening. I think that's the connection there. Without access to comprehensible input, a second language won't happen. I suppose we can have reading as a form of input, but most of us learn not so much from reading alone, but also from listening, okay? So listening is that engine. It is what fuels the comprehensible input. I just like that quote. So listening as comprehension. So we need to have comprehensible input in order to learn. And for listening, what does this mean? Okay, before we get into this, what is comprehensible input? We're going to look at it a little bit more when we get into some more second language acquisition concepts. But comprehensible input is the idea that input is what comes into our head, right? And we have to be able to understand what is coming into our head, coming in through our ears or coming in through our eyes. And we have to be able to understand it. And there are a lot of reasons that it might not be comprehensible. It might be vocabulary that we don't know. It might be spoken too quickly. It might be spoken too quietly. So there's a lot of things that might block that comprehension. But in order for us to really understand and for us to acquire and learn a new language, we need to have that comprehensible input. So listening comprehension is, well, it's basically what we think of when we say listening, right? So in fact, a lot of textbooks will even say listening comprehension and listening, they will use them synonymously. They are considered the same thing, really. And so for the purposes of this course, I'm going to pretty much do the same thing. Okay, they're not exactly the same in general terms, but for the purpose of this course, when I say listening, really I'm thinking about listening comprehension. What do we understand from the listening? Okay, because if I don't understand you, even though I'm listening to you, if I can't understand you, I'm not really listening, am I? So the listening comprehension is really what we need to be thinking about. So spoken discourse is very different from written discourse. Okay, so it's almost like they are a different thing completely. It's like two different languages: spoken language and written language. Sometimes when I'm teaching, somebody will ask a question, and I'll say, "Oh, that's true for written, but it's not really true for spoken." And similar to that's more British English versus American English. Oh, that's written English, not spoken English, or that's spoken English, but not true for written English. They are quite different from each other. Okay, so spoken discourse has very different characteristics from written discourse, and these differences can add a number of dimensions to our understanding of how we can process speech. Okay, how our brain processes the sounds that come into our head. Okay, so for example, spoken discourse is usually instantaneous. A listener must process it while it's happening, and there's not usually a chance to listen again. If we're having a face-to-face conversation, okay, two people are talking to each other face-to-face, sometimes we can ask them to say it again, and we can have a chance to hear it again. because we'll say, excuse me, pardon me, could you repeat that? I don't understand. So we can give the speaker some feedback telling them they need to slow down a little bit, okay? And generally, I'll give you a little bit of a teacher tip. If you are traveling, maybe not a teacher tip, but a tip. If you're traveling to a place where native English speakers speak, like the US or the UK or Australia, it's okay to say, excuse me or pardon me, I don't understand. And they will very gladly repeat it or rephrase it a little bit. But if you ask that like 2 or 3 times, then they start to get a little bit weird about it. They don't want to talk to you much anymore. So you get one free chance to ask again, and people will not be upset. So use that free chance to repeat, ask them to repeat something when you don't understand. But usually it is very linear. It's going in one direction only. Spoken discourse is very fast, okay? So in a regular, typical conversation, the average speed is around 220 words per minute. And some people speak faster than that, of course. Some people speak a little bit more slowly. But the average is about 220 words a minute. And that's really fast, especially for our second language, or a young second language learner. That's really, really fast. Okay. Spoken discourse is usually linear in structure, as I mentioned a moment ago, as opposed to hierarchical in written discourse. So that's another difference between written and spoken. Spoken discourse is spoken one clause at a time. Okay. Longer utterances in a conversation tend to be several coordinated clauses joined together, and they are context dependent. Okay. The speakers tend to share some sort of background knowledge, and what you're talking about with somebody, they know what you're talking about because of the location, because of other things in the conversation. So you've probably had the experience where two friends are talking, and you come up and join them in the middle of their conversation, and for a couple of minutes you're lost because you don't know the context. You understand the words that they're saying, but you don't understand what they're talking about because you've missed the context. So spoken discourse is linear, it's fast, it is situational, okay? It is complicated, okay? Well, I'll stop right there at complicated. Part of the cognitive model of language processing involves this idea of using prior knowledge, okay? So that means that model says that when we listen or when we read, we process the information both top down and bottom up, okay? What does that mean? Top down, bottom up. We'll start with top down, okay? So when we are listening, when we're having a conversation, and when we're listening specifically, we're using our prior knowledge and our experiences, okay? And we're using that to help us understand what's being said. So we know certain things about certain topics and certain situations, and we use this information to help us understand. We also use it to predict what the other person is going to say. In a speaking or a writing class, we might use top-down activities like asking the students to tell us what they know about something. What experience do you have about that thing? So we're trying to make a connection between the learner and the learner's experience and the whatever we're going to listen to or whatever they are going to read. So building a connection, okay, connecting it to their lives, connecting it to their own past experience. That's top-down, okay? It's something a lot of us do without really thinking of it as top-down or bottom-up. So it's connecting them, their prior experience, to the reading or to the listening. We use pre-reading questions to get the students to activate their schemata, okay? To access their prior knowledge about a subject. That's what schemata means, okay? Schemata is the prior knowledge, okay? And how it's organized in our heads. And so we use this term in second language acquisition to refer to activate their schemata means to access their prior knowledge about a subject. So in a linguistics course or SLA course, you'll hear that, activating their schemata. People will say, I remember hearing it the first time and wondering, what does that mean? And I had to look it up in a book. Schema and schemata, singular, plural. Okay. If we are having a discussion, we might have pre-discussion questions to activate the student's previous knowledge, to activate their schemata. Now, that's top down. What about bottom up? Well, bottom up is where we assume that they don't have a lot of background information. Or as we're listening, we're not accessing that information. And what we're doing is we are listening and trying to understand all of the little the grammar bits and the individual sounds and try and putting that puzzle together. Okay? So bottom-up processing means using the information we have about sounds and about word meanings and about discourse markers like first and then and after that to assemble our understanding of what we read or what we hear one step at a time. Okay? So our beginners, they are hearing the sounds and they've just been learning those sounds and they're putting those puzzle pieces together. And that it's pretty tiring to be constantly doing this. I think about when I'm trying to listen to a Korean conversation, and I'm really doing a lot more of this than I am top down. We use bottom-up activities when we use scaffolding methods like pre-teaching vocabulary or certain grammar functions before we read or before we do a speaking task. Okay, so the top-down pre-reading or pre-discussion questions might be about what do you know about this topic. Bottom-up are what's the vocabulary that we need to understand. Okay, learners need both. Okay, the processing is we are doing both in our heads as we are listening and as we are trying to understand, as we are building this putting together this picture in our minds of what we're hearing. Okay, students must hear some sounds, bottom-up processing, and hold them in their short-term memory long enough to connect them to each other and then interpret them, interpret what they've just heard before something new comes along. And remember, those new things are coming along very quickly, 220 words a minute. So this is happening very quickly and it's very complicated, this processing, while new information is still going on. Sometimes we get stuck, right? We're still thinking about something. We're trying to figure out what that meant. And by then, either we figure it out or we give up, the speaker has gone on and talked for another 10, 15, 20 seconds. And that's a lot more words that they've just spoken and we've missed because our brain is still processing something that we've said. And that's true in our first and second language. Have you ever been in a conversation where you go, wait, I'm still processing what you just said a minute ago. Your brain's focus on one thing that's like, whoa, that was a big statement. And our brains stop at that and we're thinking about that. And you need to tell the speaker to go back and let's talk about that for a minute more, right? We do that in our first language. We have to do it even more in our second language. Okay, so while all of that's happening, the listeners are using their background knowledge, the top-down processing, to determine meaning with respect to that prior knowledge. Okay, it's complicated. It's messy. It's a lot is going on. So let's use an example. Okay, imagine I said the following to you. Okay, I'll read it. The guy I sat next to on the bus this morning on the way to work was telling me he runs a Thai restaurant in Chinatown. Apparently, it's very popular at the moment. Now, if you hear that, well, you've heard it, but you also read it. So we're cheating a little bit. But if you heard that, only heard it, to understand this utterance using bottom-up processing, we would notice that our brains break it down into chunks. Okay, we look at the clauses. Okay, the little chunks of words, like we're doing this to get the core meaning. These are the points that we're listening to that give us meaning, and then from this we kind of rebuild the picture. Okay, the guy. Okay, I sat next to him on the bus. this morning, so we have some time frame. He was telling me he runs a Thai restaurant in Chinatown. Apparently, it's very popular and at the moment. So our brain, we're listening to it. This is what sticks in our head. This is what sticks in our brain. And as we're doing this, we're processing these sounds into words, and these words into chunks, and the chunks into meaning. But also, we might be thinking also about Chinatown and a restaurant and Thai food and our experience with those things, and bus. So we have experience on a bus. So I can imagine sitting on a bus. I can imagine where Chinatown is. I can imagine a Thai restaurant there. So we're combining these bottom up and top down, but the focus here, this is what our brain is interpreting with the bottom up. Okay. After we get those little bits, then we start processing. Okay. So I'm going to back up. Okay. I'm going to back up a slide. So these things here, these chunks of these phrases, the guy I sat next to on the bus, this happens first, and then we add to it a little bit. Okay, then I was on the bus. There was a guy next to me. We talked. Now these are a little bit more like sentences, right? And so these chunks, they help us to identify the underlying propositions the utterance expresses. Okay, so it is these units of meaning that we remember. Okay, there's going to be some things that we don't even, it doesn't even stick in our head. It just goes, the expression, it goes one ear and then out the other. But most of it does stick. Okay, it is these units of meaning that we remember, and not the form in which we originally heard them. We don't remember the grammar. We don't remember if they had a grammatical mistake, right? So our knowledge of grammar helps us to understand, though, and it helps us to find the right chunks. And the speaker also helps. And the speaker helps in this process through their intonation and their pausing at certain points, right? Sometimes they might stretch out a word if they need to give it some emphasis. They might say a little bit louder or a little bit quieter. So they help us with our understanding through speaking differently. Okay, learners need a large vocabulary and a good knowledge of sentence structure to process text bottom up. Okay, our young learners don't have a strong vocabulary. Okay, and they don't have a good knowledge of sentence structure, but they also don't have a lot of experiences in the world. Okay, that's with young learners. All of this is still happening, but we're building this world, and we're building this vocabulary, and we're building these structures. So it's a little bit different with young learners, but the process still happens. Okay, so exercises that develop bottom-up processing help the learner to do such things as retain input while it's being processed. Okay, it helps the learner to recognize word and clause divisions, and to recognize keywords. Okay. I'll read this again. Exercises that develop bottom-up processing help the learner to do such things as recognize key transitions in the discourse. We need to, as we're listening, sometimes we'll hear some words, these transitions in the discourse, that tell us that the speaker is going in a different direction. Okay, and so we're moving from one thing to the next thing, and if we miss that transition, it gets very confusing. Okay, reorganize grammatical relationships between key elements in the sentences. Okay, use stress and intonation to identify words and sentence functions. And so as we're speaking, if we do these things, if we use these intonation changes, it can help our learners to understand better. Okay, so traditional classrooms, many traditional classroom listening activities focus primarily on bottom-up processing, okay, with exercises such as dictation, right? Do you use dictation in your classes? Have you ever used dictation? When you were studying English, did you use dictation a lot? Dictation is a way of testing our learners. well can they understand, and then how can they write it down? Close listening, with a Z, not an S, not close listening, like filling in the gaps kind of thing. The use of multiple choice questions after listening text. Okay, so we listen. So like a lot of the standardized tests, right? The TOEIC test and other type of the Sunung, right? So we listen to something, and as we're listening, we're looking at questions and we answer multiple choice questions. And then similar activities that require close and detailed recognition and processing of the input that's coming in. They assume that everything the listener needs to understand is contained in the input. Okay, they don't need this top down because everything is in the text. Okay, I'm using text. A lot of times we think of text as being what's written, but it can be used for spoken language as well. And so I use it here both for spoken and written. Since we're talking about listening, I use text a lot to refer to listening text, listening the words that are being spoken. So we'll look at some bottom up and top down in future lectures. Okay, a little bit here and there throughout this whole course. Comprehensible input. I mentioned this at the beginning. This is we need to understand what's coming in, right? When we listen, we are receiving input. Okay, how we comprehend that input can come from the top down or bottom up. Okay, we can connect it to things that we already know, or we can try to figure out the meaning by looking at the chunks of language that's coming in. Okay, age plays a factor, and so does the second language ability. That plays a factor as well, and I suppose first language ability would as well. But we're not focusing on first language acquisition. We're focusing on second language acquisition, second language listening. And that brings us to the end of our class. I do want to say that at the end of every one of my lectures, we have these two little questions. Okay, I hope you found it interesting, of course, or one statement and one question. I hope you found it interesting. And then this is something I want you to think about every lesson, but throughout the lesson as well. Okay, what did you learn today that you can use in your own teaching? What did you learn today in today's lecture that can be useful in making your students be better listeners, better speakers perhaps, better readers, better writers, but for this course, better listening? That quote from David Noonan came in his book called Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. So it's a pretty good book. It's a general book, not specific to listening. Then, of course, teaching listening. Brown has written a lot of books on listening. His experience in Japan and Korea and North America as well, and then Jack Richards too. That's all for our first lesson. I hope you found it informative. I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you in lecture number 2. Take care.